Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, Susan and I discuss an article called "The Testing Predators Have Beaten the ACT and the College Board." And this article is by Akil Bello, and it's in Forbes. Lisa and I answer a question from a student who wants to know, how do I decide what my early decision school is going to be? Besides, my parents keep asking me, what school am I going to ED to? And our interview is with John Ambrose, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Michigan State University. This is part 2 of 3 on understanding Michigan State University. And of course, our spotlight is John Ambrose helping us understand Michigan State University. Hey, Susan.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good. Friends, Susan and I are warmed up. We've had our hour chit-chat amongst ourselves. So we're like baseball players. We warm up first.
That's right.
And talk about a range of college admissions. And then we're like, at some point we probably should hit record.
I know. Well, we've been doing this for about 15 years. So
yeah, I think 20.
Oh my gosh.
You know how life flies. But so we want to start out, and I did this before last month with Susan. I asked her to share an admissions tip. And I asked her again, and she's got one that I've been wanting to talk about. So happy she shared it. Go ahead and take it away, Susan.
Well, one of my favorite tips for rising seniors right now is concerning that intersection of demonstrated interest and the common application. It's important for rising seniors to think about how colleges are going to see them. It's very hard for teenagers to get outside their own perspective on that. And I knew that at school, Mark, when you and I were working together. Kids aren't good at that. They're just learning the art of perspective taking, meaning how can I look at anything through someone else's eyes? That's really a late adolescent developmental skill that parents know very well. When parents say, look at this from my perspective, and the kids are like, can't really do that at my age. I'm just learning to do that. But so this comes as a surprise to kids when I tell them that as they put colleges in their Common App college list, even as juniors or younger kids for that matter, right? That
Sure.
It triggers a message to the colleges. The reason why we know this is because kids will often get an email from those colleges saying, hey, we noticed that you're interested. And they won't necessarily tell them, hey, we saw that you added us to your Common App list. I haven't heard that from students. Maybe, Mark, you may have gotten a letter from that if you're in there actually as a junior or rising senior. I'm in with a practice account because I don't want to get the onslaught of promotional material from, I don't want to get on any college's mailing list is the truth of it. I did that years ago and it wasn't worth it.
No, Susan and I were talking about that before, how, before they had the practice account for counselors, we would go in and just to get a sense of what's the student experience like, log in, and then you start to get all this mail.
Yeah.
Like both emails and physical mail you get marketed to. And so I did that once, and then I felt kind of guilty, like I'm taking away this, they're paying for all this materials just on me.
That's right. You become, and you're counted in their system, which, serves them right. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
I'm not defending them, but if any of our listeners think this would be an interesting idea, kind of to impersonate a student, which is it's okay, use a different email, create an email for that purpose, so you're not getting it either in your personal or your work email address. But the truth of the matter is that colleges know that, and basically they embrace you as what they refer to as a prospect or an inquiry. So if you're not already in their mailing system, meaning you didn't sign up, you didn't get picked up through student search, you didn't visit, you didn't go to a college fair and sign up, you're brand new to them. You are embraced into the prospect system, and you will hear from them forever unless you unsubscribe. Even if you remove them from your Common App, I don't think that's going to remove you from their mailing list. So I always say to kids that if they're getting, they shouldn't ever complain about the onslaught of emails, because it's within their power to unsubscribe. Now, how responsive colleges are to that remains to be seen, but they should legitimately have an unsubscribe button and take you out. But think about the message that you as a student might be sending to a college by putting them in your Common App, because your purpose for putting them there is to look at their requirements, their supplementary writing. Clearly, you are getting ready to apply, right? There's nothing that says it quite as affirmatively to a college that you're looking at the number of teacher recommendations that are required, the minimum and the maximum. You're looking at what extra writing is entailed. You're also looking at how they ask you to name your academic interests, right? Because that varies tremendously, and kids don't think enough about that point. But anyway, we're thinking here today about demonstrated interest. So if a college cares, and we know that some do and some don't, the first thing I say to kids is, first of all, find out if DI, as we call it, demonstrated interest, is considered is in the admission process. And that is relatively easy to see on the common data set, at least for the previous year, the 21-22 admission cycle, whether or not a student's level of interest is considered. Item C7 on the common data set. I'm telling you where to go. It's not hidden. And the common data set, for those of you who are familiar with that, is it's not an admission publication. It's generally on a college's institutional research webpage, and it usually follows a standardized reporting format. Very few colleges mess with that, because this is where the guidebooks go. It's where U.S. News and World Report goes. It's where the Washington Post goes for their data used in the rankings. It's also where the banks go and the lending organizations go when they're figuring out a bond rating. So, Mark, if you're the president of a college and you're building a new building at Stucker University, you're going to borrow some money, right? And
Sure.
You want your bond rating to be, I don't even know what the highest is, AA, AAA. Mark, you probably know better than I, but it's a data analysis done by the bond ratings, and they use this data. It's the only place they can get data that allows them to compare apples to apples, meaning it's a snapshot of the university or college at a particular point after a new class enrolls. So that said, this chart, C7, in the C section of Common Data Set, which is the first time, first year / freshman admission profile, is not on the admissions website because it's too much data for the average consumer. But if you want a quick and dirty way to find out what are the factors used in the admission process, academic and non-academic, this is the place to go. The first item in the non-academic part of C7 is the interview, whether or not it's considered or not considered. That's generally, is one offered or is one not offered? It's a fast way to do that research. You can also go to the website of the college, of course. The last item in C7 is the student's level of interest. So they don't call it DI, demonstrated interest. They call it level of student's interest. It's generally either considered or not considered. Once in a great while, it's very highly considered, but you don't see that very often. But if you do, man alive, take it seriously, because that means that's a factor that will elevate your application above a lot of kids with similar credentials.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, Susan, is that sometimes I don't feel everybody's totally transparent on that question. That's the one thing in that common data set where there's schools that I know they use demonstrated interest. It's very clear. And then, of course, there's like a little bit of a gradation in there, like, I can't remember, extremely important, somewhat, very. And sometimes, I just think people like to keep that close to the vest a little bit. So I think all the other stuff that's in there is pretty straightforward, because it has alumni status and, all the other different things that it lists in there, recommendations and essays and all those things, academic GPA, all that stuff. And there are also schools, some of these are the same schools that sometimes when I'll talk to them, they'll say, this is a quote from one, we're not going to reveal our secret sauce, And so sometimes I think people keep it a little close to the vest, but I would say that, yeah, if they're saying very important, that's a complete tell. If they're going to be transparent like that. And some schools are really like that, right? Like a school like a Lehigh, they are so clear about the role and they're unapologetic. And I appreciate the truth in advertising. If everybody would be so transparent, there's some schools that I find on that one demonstrated interest, they just like to keep it a little closer to the vest. I don't know if you've
well,
seen that.
And a big reason for that, Mark, is if everybody knows, it ruins the value of it.
Correct.
Right. Because then it becomes just another standardized piece, whereas.
Right. And you can game it.
But I think it's a terrible inequity value in a way, because if you're not saying to families, we like applicants who like us, right? Of course, ED is the biggest in the world, right?
Right.
But,
of course.
But if you're just like at Bates in the 1980s, when we started recording demonstrated interest way before it was known as that, and it was, I don't know, I never heard of another college. I'm sure other people were doing it, but we only cared about certain types of engagement.
Mm-hmm. Like visits.
Yeah, well, visits, because there we were in the northeastern corner of the United States, and any family that made the trip to Maine to visit the college, it was an enormous investment of time and money, and it mattered. It made a difference. We also printed in all of our literature that if you didn't interview, you were placing yourself at a disadvantage, that it was a choice you as an applicant were making. And we vowed if you weren't able to visit on campus, and a lot of families weren't, that we would interview you. And bear in mind, this was before even Skype. We made it possible to have a live interview somewhere, either with an admission staff member or a graduate of the college. If that didn't work out, we did a phone interview. And then as we moved into the digital landscape, it was a lot easier for colleges to do that. But, my feeling is whatever a college offers, they're going to look and see if you took advantage of it as a way to get to know everything possible that you could about that institution as a basis for applying. And truthfully, every applicant should be able to defend their reason for applying. Colleges refer this to fit. Can you articulate the why major and why this college? And that's where you have to prove you took advantage of what they had to offer. And whether that is visits to the website, some colleges do record clicks on the website. I think that's a terrible, inauthentic way to look at it. But if you're an engineering applicant, did you attend an engineering virtual visit? You were offered the chance to sit in on an engineering class virtually. Did you do it? And we know you were offered because we sent you the invitation, says the college.
Yeah, and I think that people would probably be surprised how many different sort of assessment metrics are potentially out there. There's a lot. Another one is just when the essay is optional or not.
Oh, yes.
They put optional essay. What a built-in test to see if you're invested.
That's right.
And let's face it, even having a few college-specific questions. I'll share this with you, Susan. You'll find this interesting. By the way, just to prove it's been more than 15 years, this is year 14 for me in Atlanta, Susan. So
oh my gosh.
So we go back
6 more
another
years.
6 or so before that. Yeah. But so the college fair that we worked on together for years. MIT was there, and I was having a conversation with the senior MIT person, in the breakout room where they get the refreshments, and demonstrated interest came up, and they said, we don't look at that at all. And I said, well, I've heard you say on your presentations that people that don't have an interview have an under 1% acceptance rate. And at that time, people that did interview had a 10% acceptance rate. Of course, this is a little while ago now. And then secondly, you guys have your own application. Your own application. So I said, you've built demonstrated interest right into your system. Ditto Georgetown, you could say. And she said, you know what, you got me there. So she admitted it, So that's another, the various ways it can be implemented, having your own application or making you do 2 to 3 extra questions or optional. And we could go on and on and on. But
yeah. Well, I think going back to the common application and the list, any way that, colleges have hundreds of thousands of kids in their inquiry pool, right?
Yeah.
They're doing student search. They're buying, SAT scores. They're doing all this stuff to generate inquiries at the beginning of the funnel, the funnel that leads, from inquiry to potentially visitor to application to enrolling. And all college people have an enrollment management funnel, admissions funnel in mind. And when a student goes to the trouble of putting a college in their Common App list, first of all, there are only 20 spaces, and it shows an early level of research and focus. And to me, that is signaling your colleges. If I was a high school junior, rising senior, it's sending a signal that you're getting serious about that college. So I think it elevates that contact. It also, from my perspective, you're not just doing this for show. You're doing it because it gives you access to how the college is going to evaluate you, what they value, what they want to know about you that is different from what other colleges want to know about you. And I think that's enormously helpful to someone who's deciding whether or not they're going to apply. Sometimes students say to me, wow, I didn't realize that I couldn't choose business at the time that I applied. So good examples, Virginia and is it University of Richmond? There are a couple of schools, of course, the ones that don't offer undergraduate business, that sometimes surprises kids, but Michigan's process, for example, kids think they can just check business off on the application and start their business freshman year. There are a bunch of colleges that Wake Forest, you can't even apply to the business program, right, until after you've done a year or more. And some colleges, kids are like, oh, I didn't notice that on the website. And that's either a turn on or a turn off. But they suddenly notice that when they're in that Common App supplement for those colleges and they're looking at the choice of fields of study.
I feel like we could go on and on.
I know.
No, we could do a whole session on this because we both have so much to share.
Well, maybe we will at some point.
Maybe we will. So for our admissions vernacular, we've used the term DEI before, very commonly used term in admissions. You'll hear it used a lot, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've had that before as an admissions vernacular. A term I'm hearing more and more is JEDI, JEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so on my Colorado fly-in trip, I heard that came up 2 or 3 times at different schools. And so JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, I think ever since the, what's the name? I'm drawing a blank. The cop in Minnesota that got charged for murdering, Yeah, but I'm trying to think of the name of the person that was killed. I was drawing a blank on his name. It was, George Floyd. I think ever since George Floyd, that justice piece is being emphasized more. It's one thing to have diversity, equity, inclusion, but now you're seeing a little bit more of that justice piece. So just another word to add to our admissions vernacular.
You can be a Jedi warrior as a college applicant. I love that. Well, because
awesome.
Again, I think that frames it in a beautiful way, Mark. I like that. I'm so glad you shared that.
Our big number for the day is 57.2. And you say, that's not too big. Well, it is when it's percent. Unfortunately, this isn't the greatest stat. This is a survey just recently released that says 57.2% of people working in higher ed say that they are planning on looking for other work within the next 12 months.
Whoa.
Yeah. And this survey was done by 3,814 higher ed employees. So that's a large sample size. And it goes into a lot more detail in terms of, well, why are you looking for work? And most of them, not surprisingly, compensation.
Yep.
And a lot of that's gas prices, food, and probably being poorly compensated where they're at right now. So that's a high number, and 57.2% in higher ed employees saying their resume will be on the street in the next 12 months.
Gee.
So that was a little shocking. That's pretty high, isn't it, Susan?
Very high. I think it shows you that it's now higher ed professionals isn't just admissions. Obviously, it's everybody who works for a college or university, right? Very unsettling.
Yeah, and who knows I wonder if they even included adjuncts in that. You would definitely get it, but maybe not, because there might be, I don't know, who knows? I don't know. I just know it was higher ed employees.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right, well, let's transition. So we have a really big article today, and I knew Susan would be the perfect person to discuss this, given her background. But it's by Akil Bello, who we've talked about before, one of the most outspoken people when it comes to the SAT and ACT, having been a test prep tutor himself for 30 plus years. He's been very outspoken about the inequities of the test. And the name of the article is called "The Testing Predators Have Beaten ACT and the College Board." And it's appeared in June 27th of 2022 in Forbes magazine. And so basically the article starts out, it's featuring Janet Goodwin, who's the CEO of the ACT. And it says she's not in her office overseeing a large administration, but what is she doing in a 3-star hotel in Atlanta, hobnobbing with a lot of people in the test prep industry? She said that would have never happened before. And she's at an executive meeting with the College Board. They're at the annual conference of test preparation, and it's like an industry event. And the article goes on to talk about how at one point the suppliers of the test decried the test prep industry. You just would never see that. In fact, here's a quote from David Coleman, who is the CEO of the College Board. He, referring to the test prep industry, here's what Coleman said: "They are predators who prey on the anxieties of parents and children, and they provide no real education benefit." So I was like, whoa, that's pretty strong. And the article goes into the history of the test. It goes back and looking at how the SAT was birthed in 1926, and then early on, test prep started as early as the 30s, but it was more of these little small little local outfits. And then it talks about how the College Board and ETS, which actually wrote the test up until 2016, they went to great pains to rebut any report that ever suggested that test preparation could lead to increased score gains. And here's another quote from the College Board. If the board's test can be regularly beaten through coaching, then the board is discredited. So the article basically talks about how they have come full circle from basically taking the position that test prep is not valid because our test can't be prepped for, to sort of being in bed with the test prep industry now and partnering with them and realizing that, okay, the test is under assault. And the article goes and it talks about how people like John Katzman, who founded Princeton Review, but he's often railed against the test. Princeton Review, I didn't know this until recently, Susan, that Princeton Review was actually founded as an experiment to prove that the test could be coached.
That's right.
Yeah, so that was like the history of it, and then it led to this big company. And so Katzman is, for decades, been outspoken about the fact that your test can absolutely be beaten and prepped for. And so they have railed against that and attempted to debunk that. And then now, with the test under assault, with number of test takers being down, the two are in bed with each other, trying to figure out what can we do to partner together to make more money. And now the article does say, listen, I'm not trying to say that no good things have happened as a result of this. It talks about how one of the things when they finally did acknowledge that there was some advantage to prepping, they turned their attention to saying, okay, well, let's help under-resourced kids, whether that's through Khan Academy or the ACT had a few different initiatives. So that is sort of the angle they took that would almost be a little bit more politically palatable. But here you are now completely working in sort of concert with one another, trying to figure out how can we get more people to take the test. So I could say a lot more, but I want to hear your thoughts, Susan, so I'll let you take it away. Take this where you want to go with it. We know that you did admission at Bates in a test optional environment. I know from working with you for the last 20 years, I know how passionately you feel about both the College Board as well as some of the abuses of the test. So I'll let you kind of take this wherever you want to go.
It's been kind of a focus of my entire career, just in an odd way, for someone for whom testing was an anathema when I was a child. It's interesting that I have been this closely connected to standardized testing for the rest of my career, but maybe that's given me some compassion or empathy for the subject. But interestingly, and I'll say this about my own background because it kind of shaped my perspective. When I was in high school, I went to a good independent school, a Quaker school in New York City, just kind of a standard academic school. And one thing we were never taught anything about was standardized test taking because it didn't really exist in the milieu of my school. It had when I was in elementary school in the New York City public schools, because we all tested for the selective New York City high schools. So I remember there was an IQ cut at that time. This shows you how far back that was, where if your IQ was above a certain level, you got to sit for the exams for Stuyvesant, Hunter, and Bronx Science in New York City. And listeners, if you're New York City folks, this will ring true. Those were about the only selective New York City public schools at that time.
Was Brooklyn Tech not around?
Not that I remember. It may have been, but it wasn't on the radar screen. It was really only those three. There may have been more. I don't know, but I think they came later than that time. But the whole standardized testing was just not, after elementary school, didn't exist in my experience at all. We didn't have I didn't take regents because I was at an independent school. Maybe that was part of the problem. But so I got to junior year And I was faced with the same thing that kids are faced with today, PSATs and SATs. And my mother found me a prep class, which was called Kaplan. So they existed in the 60s and 70s. And all it did was teach me how to take a standardized test. I don't know if it did a blessed thing for me, except gave me some experience. And one thing the College Board has always admitted to is that there is a practice effect. And that's true of any standardized test, which I learned later in my master's program when I was in a school counseling program and we studied educational and psychological testing, that there is always been a practice test. That's why they only let kids take IQ tests every so many years, because once they're exposed to the Stanford Binet or the whatever the other IQ tests are, it ups their scores the next time. So there has to be an interval. So anyway, enough of that. But so my career went on. I ended up in admissions at Bates in the 1980s. And we started a statistical research project that was looking at, well, what really were the factors that predicted success at the college? We had, we were flying by the seat of our pants in admissions in terms of how we admitted kids, and the faculty wanted us to do some research. So we grabbed a statistics professor. We went over and interviewed the folks at Bowdoin College who had thrown out standardized testing when they went co-ed, interestingly, and also...
Which is 69.
Yep. And
1969.
That's when Bowdoin made the decision.
Yeah.
They went co-ed and they were being accused of implicit racist tendencies, meaning why...
Racist or sexist?
Racist. So it was the double whammy of, we're going to start admitting women and we have to acknowledge that they're kind of not as smart or not as certainly reflected on standardized testing. Women's test scores, girls' test scores at that point were pathetically lower than boys. And some of that reflected that girls weren't persisting in math to the same level, but also it was just a brain architecture issue that had not really been examined at that point. And then we had this double whammy of if the college was going to, if this is Bowdoin, was going to start recruiting students of color who had a less educated parent group and less high income related group, they were going to have to do something. So they did no research. They had an avant-garde admissions director come in and just say to the faculty, we've made the decision, we're throwing the scores out. So we can go co-ed and begin to recruit non-white and non-affluent students. And they went along with that because this was what the trustees and everybody were saying was the direction of the school. So on one hand, it was visionary, but there was no evidence, no research to back it up. But
I did not know that history.
Isn't that
That's
interesting?
fascinating. I knew they went to Substone 69 and all that, and of course they're hailed 53 years. But I didn't know those were the factors that prompted that. But it makes sense
not a blessed bit of research.
Yeah.
Now they did research after the fact, but
sure.
Dick Mall was the visionary admissions dean who came in. He had a brilliant and very progressive leadership history. He was also just a great dynamic human being, someone I admired for his entire career. He was a risk taker. And he was extremely convincing. He went on and saw other colleges through enormous transitions of that kind. But so Bates, the faculty said, we're not going to let you do that. We're not going to let you do it by the seat of your pants. So our faculty members who were doing the research and staging this went over and did a lot of work with Bowdoin, and they were very helpful. But anyway, so what we did is we started for a couple of years reading test blind, but we weren't test blind. The scores were going to be there for us, meaning the public didn't know about this. And we started looking at how the absence of scores affected our admissions decisions. And first we did it with just removing subject tests, which were then called achievement tests, from the equation. And then after a couple of years of doing that, eliminating the SAT. And by 1984, we had so much data that showed the benefits of being test optional and the fact that the scores in multivariable regression analysis were not allowing us to statistically admit students who then achieved higher grade point averages. Because Mark, all the SAT was designed to do and validated to do was predict first year grade point average, right? They've never pretended that it was designed to do anything else. So colleges, in validating it, look at first year GPA and then they look at graduating GPA. But freshman GPA was really what the SAT was designed to predict. And that's the only validation. And statistically, validation means your test is predicting what it was designed to predict. That's all it means. Reliability means that tests are consistent over time in their predictions. And validity and reliability are the only two ways that tests are elevated and then have a longer life, right? Because that's what we know. So off and running, 1984, we began admitting students without any scores. And we became, at Bates, the test case for selective liberal arts colleges in a way that Bowdoin was not able to be because they didn't have the longitudinal data. So Bill Hiss, the Dean of Admissions, who has became one of the heroes of the test optional movement, has gone on for 40 years now, looking at not just Bates College students and the benefits of how test optional benefits DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but how it opens equity and access doors. It's a college putting its money where its mouth is, where it's putting its policies where its mouth is, of course. But also showing that statistical research can convince your faculty that they are going to have kids who are as smart, as motivated, more diverse, more ambitious, less privileged, and more of an influence in a university or college community. It's taken a long time because small liberal arts colleges had it easy in a way to prove this because the faculty already pretty much knew it, right? They knew it. It was the research universities that were STEM heavy, that took more longitudinal research work. But as soon as Wake Forest and Rochester and other schools of that nature, when Temple followed and other schools, then there was no excuse for schools. The sadness was that College Board and the Ivy League, particularly Harvard, have had a very, very intimate relationship since the SAT was invented pretty much by the Ivy League, right? And their early mission was an equity mission, the common yardstick, so to speak, but they put it into practice without any, and we're talking about the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, without any notice that America was changing and that universities weren't going to be just for higher income white men.
So what are your thoughts, Susan, on the evolution of the College Board? From because we used to talk about the College Board all the time when we were working together, and I know that you do not always agree with their practices. What are your thoughts on how they've done a 180 on this topic?
Well, what I have found confusing, and this article, Mark, brought it out in a very clear way, is they have reversed their strident opinions on practically everything in order to stay alive. And, truth be told, when the University of California abandoned testing, the UC system was the College Board's largest revenue producing partner, right? So we knew that was going to be a building block, that once that domino fell, we were going to see the College Board rush to become, to take on some new roles. But it started well before then. I mean, I chaired NACAC's first standardized testing commission in 1992 through 95. I think our report came out in 95. And it was the first time that NACAC threw resources into looking at what was going on with the standardized testing, the dominant players in standardized testing. So I was new at Westtown. I think had I still been at Bates, they would not have been interested in having me there. But because at Bates, I'd gotten to know John Katzman, I'd gotten to know all sorts of people. And of course, some people who've been around in the profession remember when I got in Gaston Caperton's face at a College Board meeting when he associated the test optional movement with colleges dumbing down their admission process. It was an act of desperation. And Bates had been test optional for a while at this point. Mount Holyoke had just made the announcement. And Gaston Caperton, as president of the College Board in the largest national public forum, and I wish I remembered the date, but my guess is it's about 1990. I think I was still at. Sorry, I'm not going to remember that, but it was right around that time. Actually used the pulpit of the College Board National Forum to levy that unprecedented and unsubstantiated comment at liberal arts colleges that had now years of research to support that scores were not adding anything of value to their admissions evaluation. None of them were saying they were useless to other institutions. They were just saying, we've done the work to show it's not letting us make better admissions decisions. And to target Mount Holyoke, one of the finest liberal arts colleges in the country, I stood up and politely shamed him. And it was for a lot of people a turning point in the conversation because a lot of schools were afraid of the College Board. And then ironically, he appointed me to a major College Board advisory committee following that. I think he
wanted you to be on his side.
Well, I think he respected what I had to say, but he was towing this financial revenue driven line, which they have had to leave behind now because the die is cast. I mean, when the avalanche of test optional colleges started, and this was well before the pandemic, it began to call into question why schools were holding on to scores if there was such a weight of evidence. And there is now research available probably for 100 or 200 colleges that have done the research that were leading them in that direction anyway before the pandemic. There's some wonderful stuff that's published by Bill Hiss and his team of researchers who led this forward.
I'll say this, Susan. Of course, I just got a couple of things. One, you talked about the role of the UCs. A lot of people may not know. Remember when it wasn't that long ago, from 2005 to 2016, when the SAT went to that 2,400 point scale, that was because the UCs were going to pull out.
That's right.
Back then, because without the writing component. So they added that 800 points to have a writing section just to keep the UCs in. So I thought of that when you were making the comments. And so that's now that was '05, but the talk had to be going on before that. But I was recently on this Colorado flying trip, and presentation I attended Denver. Denver had done this research, and they found when they had GPA, when they added test scores, it was only adding 2% more predictability. 2%. And they're like, why are we putting everybody through all of this for 2%? And so, they're one of the universities that had dropped it pre-pandemic.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what you're describing, Mark, is multivariable regression analysis, which is the statistical process that where you can add and remove data points from your profile. And a lot of the colleges that did what Denver did found that when they added other predictors of success, that it completely eliminated the loss of any positive weight provided by SATs. So it depends what your institution values. If you feel you're an institution where a student's character, motivation, intellectual curiosity, any of that, it adds to their success once they're a student at your school, then you can find a way to put that into your admissions formula and increase the validity of your admissions prediction. That's why the character movement has gained so much momentum right now, because it's helping colleges with rubrics for quantifying, for evaluating character points in the admission process, so they're not just kind of amorphous, unquantifiable points.
And I definitely want you to come back and do a deeper dive on that, because I know you've been involved in leadership on the character movement for some time, and I know how strongly you feel about it. And there's some exciting things happening there. I know Brennan's continued to be very involved
absolutely
in those initiatives. And for those of you who don't know, Brennan Barnard's got a pretty large national platform as a writer, but he first cut his teeth training under Susan's tutelage, and so but they both have strong convictions on that. And so I definitely want to get a really good article where we can talk about character-based evaluation and some of the things that are happening there. And I think that's actually really important, because as long as something is just subjective,
yes,
it feels squishy. But when you attach numbers, and it's hard because you want to be accurate.
Well, and you have to know what you're evaluating, and that, colleges and universities have to go through a lot of self-evaluation to be able to say, here are qualities of successful students. And that's going to depend on the type of college or university. It's going to be different maybe for a writing intensive college where the classes are small and there's a lot of classroom dialogue and work with professors, from a big research university where, you may be learning more in lecture format and other things. Different kids are successful in different settings. It brings out the best of them depending on some of their temperament and personal quality. So a college really has to know what are those attributes of a successful, an unsuccessful, and an unsuccessful student. Why do some students not succeed here? And it's not just GPA. I've consulted with some colleges where faculty are very quick to say GPA doesn't always measure success. Sure, let's look at the Phi Beta Kappa kids and the kids that graduate with honors, but what about the kids that come the farthest? Let's look at the metrics that measure growth over time, because isn't that really a measurement of your institution's success? It is at a hospital.
Yeah.
It's how sick
Rod talked about this a little bit when we had Rod Skinner on.
That's right.
He used the term distance traveled. Looking at distance traveled. And when you see someone that has traveled further in their distance, like, that's very, very appealing to schools.
I couldn't agree. And you know what? SATs were strangling colleges, strangling them. They were keeping them from admitting super bright kids who had so much potential that hadn't completely come to the fore yet. and that they certainly hadn't had the advantage of a lot of test prep and other things that advantaged them beginning at an early age. But going back to your original point about kind of College Board and ACT getting into bed with test prep, we saw this coming. We saw it as soon as SAT began a relationship with Khan Academy, and sure, great. Let's close the gap between the privileged and the less privileged by giving them free test prep. But really, we want all students to take time away from other learning experiences. I just, there's a big gap there. I see why they're trying to make themselves look like the good guy, and let's take the revenue away from Princeton Review and away from Kaplan and away from the independent test prep tutors, and let's keep it for ourselves. But boy, I sure don't connect the dots on that. And I heard SAT and ACT for too many years rail against the test prep agency, vilify them, and call them predators, that I find this reprehensible. So, but the good news, and I'm not saying that the pandemic was good news by any stretch of the imagination, but if there was a good outcome from it, is it changed the complete perspective, because all the colleges that really in their hearts wanted to go test optional, which I believe is almost without exception 99% of the colleges and universities, but they either couldn't do the research, couldn't convince their faculty, or they were afraid of their reputations, or like the Ivy League, just didn't have the guts, and they were too much wed into these relationships with the testing world, and a few of them still are. Look at Georgetown in that regard, and MIT coming back into it. I would like to see, their research, because we all know that the more selective the college, the less valid the scores are. So it's the exact inverse of universities that are much less selective, who have done this anyway.
And I think people may not understand why that can be true, but it's partly how it's the caliber of the kid that you attract. The caliber of the kid that you attract is able to be successful because they've already have such evidence that they've been successful in past environments.
And statisticians refer to it as restriction of range, where before the pandemic, if you looked at a highly selective university's SAT profile and the range of scores that were even in the applicant pool, kids didn't apply. They didn't apply even if they were amazing students with tremendous potential, because they knew their scores. If they weren't a recruited athlete, or and that's not to say all recruited athletes have low scores, but if you looked at the bottom 25% of a highly selective university's freshman class in terms of scoring, those kids all had hooks. There were no random great kids in there. They were all VIP, very specific hooks, filling an institutional need that the college had predetermined. So the range of scores was, you could tell by looking at the median and the range of the middle 50%. It was very restricted. It still is to a certain point, but you are seeing, like a student I worked with the year before last, who just had a very successful first year at Yale, whose SAT scores were in the 300s and 400s. She wouldn't have bothered applying. She wouldn't have. And she's going to be a game changer for the world in a lot of ways, and for that college. I mean, the faculty now can teach these kids. They have the opportunity to have these kids as movers and shakers on their campuses. I watched those test optional kids change Bates forever. That it was just a remarkable thing to see the faculty say, where were these kids? And we basically would say to them, you didn't let us admit them because we didn't want our rankings in US News and World Report to decline. And we had to say that to the trustees first and foremost. But there was too much risk in that whole movement. But, I love this article from Akil Bello because it's basically calling out the testing agencies for their doublespeak and their, I remember when I was part of that NACAC testing commission in the 1990s, where at College Board at the VP level told me they would never superscore because it invalidated the integrity of the exam, that you could not separate the parts of the exam because of a statistical integrity truth. And how many years later, suddenly
super scores
because it got kids to take them more, it created revenue, right? They were taking it. And then ACT, announced that it was going to go to super subject specific test dates. And the pandemic slowed that down, but ACT within a short period of time, you're going to be able to sit for the science test on a separate day from the English or the reading. And if you do poorly on just one section, you'll be able to just sit for a retake on that. What happened to the statistical integrity question? It just vanished into thin air.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just have seen too much of that over time.
Where and that would be where they purport to be working in the best interest of the student, but it's really in the best interest of their financial, their pockets.
Statistically, I used to ask at conferences what happened to that point, and they would never talk about any of that, and
they're relying on everybody being new and not knowing the history.
Exactly. Well, and David Coleman, and this is nothing personal. I can't vouch for him, but he has put his foot in his mouth so many times that people who've been in the profession for a while just can't accept it anymore. And he's made it so much easier to go test optional. He really has. He really helped a lot. Because
I looked up their 990. He got 1.4 million last year, so he's still well compensated.
He's trying to figure out how to save their skin financially, and the digital, the change to the digital format is a last gasp. Mm-hmm. I don't know who's going to be interested in it.
I'm not hearing it as I talk with people and interact. I mean, they've got Tennessee right now and Florida as two state systems, and Georgia can't make up its mind. It keeps changing. Who knows what it'll do this year? Other than that, Georgetown, MIT.
But do you think are they going to go with the digital test, or are they going to say it's over? This is, I don't.
Well, those state systems, you mean?
Well, anybody. You can't convince me. I've studied enough statistics to be dangerous, but I don't see how you can equate the old and the new tests. And they've given it lip service and said, oh, of course we will. But you can't equate, meaning have statistical equivalency.
Sure.
Between tests that are given in, the digital SAT mark is what's called a branched or a computer responsive test, meaning each section on the new SAT is going to be divided in half. Half will be common and half will be responsive. This is why it can be shorter, because based on the first half of each section, the computer will decide how difficult the next set of questions is going to be. So if you aced the first half of the math test, the second half is going to be really hard. And it's basically going to push you to where you can't answer the questions correctly anymore. So, in closing, Mark, the big question in my mind is how are we as the consumer side of testing going to handle the future of the SAT and the ACT? I think there are enough voices showing us that has not been integrity in the changes that have happened of late, and we all want to watch it happen. But I think they've made their, they've dug their own holes on this. And as educational professionals, we have to continue to speak with Akil Bello and Bill Hiss and all the visionaries who saw this coming, and stand with them in this test optional environment.
Well, thank you, Susan. This was great on so many things. I love talking with you early on when we were going over demonstrated interest and use of the Common and the Common App. And I think, this is a topic we're going to continue to come back to, because this is one of the biggest stories in higher ed.
Absolutely.
The decline of testing, and it's in trouble. I do not see this digital test resuscitating it, not at all. And admission officer after admission officer after admission officer that I interview, they loved reading in a test optional environment, and they're happy to be liberated from that. So thank you so much for this, and we'll see you next month, or we'll see you on an interview. I know we've got University of Pittsburgh coming up together, so I look forward to that.
Wonderful, Mark. Always stimulating talking to you about these great, important issues.
I feel the same way. Thanks, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Lisa, it's been a while since we've got a Lily update from you. Let us know about her international travels.
Oh, well, she is, she's almost done with her study abroad, so she comes home next week. But she has been all over Europe and had a fantastic time. I think the last place she was in was Portugal. And then before that, she was in Budapest and Paris and Morocco and London and Spain. I think I'm leaving some stuff out.
Wow.
So, but yeah, she's had a great experience, but she's also ready to come home. Apparently you cannot get hot Cheetos in Italy, and that's a
She's
problem.
getting cravings.
Yes.
It's funny, the little things in life. You know, Karis is also over there. She's in London, but she's like, you can't tell people on the podcast what I'm doing. You know, you can't tell them. You're like sworn to secrecy. So,
well, did you think you should have just said that out loud, Mark? Terrible.
I think that was
secret keeping.
I think that was general.
Karis is somewhere. She's doing something, and that's all I got for you.
Yeah, I should have said somewhere in the world, maybe.
Well,
maybe
I mean, we're all somewhere in the world, right? You know, but
that would have been my secret keeping.
Yeah, well, Karis, whatever your secret thing you're up to, I hope it goes well. So
awesome. All right, let's talk college. So, you know what, my thing I want to share today that I think would surprise people if they're in admissions. For some people, this is going to seem like the simplest thing ever, but I can't underscore it enough. And that is, if people were in admissions, they would be surprised, I think, at how the majority of colleges admit the most of their applicants. You know, we have all this talk about how hard it is to get into schools. That's really this little 3% world that you're swimming in. That is not most schools. And what made me pick this is every year when students get their first acceptance, there's this sense of relief, which indicates to me that they thought there was a possibility that they might get shut out, which indicates to me that they don't realize that the overwhelming majority of schools accept the overwhelming majority of their applicants. And so I just kind of can't be said enough that when we're talking about all the different strategies and things that people use, like that's the 3% world.
Right.
It's not the 97% world. And so this wanted to kind of say that for people. So rest assured, you know, you will get in college unless you're one of these people that only applies to a small sect of schools.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Like some school information sessions that I've attended, and I know that the school might accept like 80% of their applicants, but they'll get up there and they'll talk about how competitive it is. And when I was there with Lily, I could just feel it, like this frisson of anxiety just rising up. But it's like, so they're trying to, even the schools are trying to sell that.
No,
and
I see this all the time.
Yeah, it's hard.
I see this all the time. The schools, and I get it because they feel that pressure that if you have a high admit rate, how could you be any good? That's how the public thinks. So they're sort of trying to show how selective they are. But you know what's really funny? And I'm not going to mention the school this time, but I'm going to prove to you I can keep a secret. That's what I'm going to do. But
Don't believe it.
but I was at a session and a school was doing that, and they had put their stats up there. And let's say it was something like 30 to 34 ACT is our middle and blah, 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 and all this. And then someone like raised their hand in info session and said, well, I don't really think I'm going to be able to get in this school. Like, I'm just looking, and then they just, no. They just like walked it back,
I know.
because they want the application. So they want it both ways.
I know.
And I get it. I know what they're doing because of how competitive it is. But I frequently encounter that where I hear a school, how they present themselves. And of course I have the benefit of seeing who gets in, and I'm like, come on, like you're really giving a false impression to people. And there's a downside to that, which is
Absolutely.
you can dissuade people from even applying that you would love to have.
Exactly. One school that did not do that is Arizona State. They made a deal like we are an inclusive school. It's not hard to get in. It's hard to get out. Like, you're going to have really rigorous classes and you're going to learn a lot. But I really appreciated that, that they're going to try to work with you to get you in that school.
I think they have probably done the best. They're getting a lot of love from me because I know I touted them last episode, but they have really embraced what Angel Perez has been trying to get as the new focus within the college landscape, being an access focus, the focus being on who you're serving, not who you're not serving. Not look how many people we rejected. We're so great. Look how low our admit rate is. No, we need a reverse mindset of that. And let's talk about how well you're serving the people that that apply to your institution. And so they've just completely embraced that in a way that community colleges do, regional publics do. You don't often see that from flagships, or certainly from semi to modestly to very selective public privates. You just don't see it. And I actually think it's pretty smart. And look, you liked it when you heard it.
Right. Well, I just thought that was kind of more egalitarian. And Mizzou also, I think, is one of those schools where they will work with you. I remember I went to an info session at Lily's High School, and they had somebody from Indiana, Illinois, and Mizzou, and they were presenting vignettes of admissions. And the Illinois guy was like, oh, well, probably not. And the Indiana guy was like, yeah, well, maybe. And then the Mizzou rep was like, welcome to Mizzou every single time, because they would find a way either with your GPA or your test scores to admit you. And I thought, that's nice. It made kids feel like, okay, I've got one good option that I could definitely get into.
And there are a lot of schools, I mean, truth be told, like Kentucky does a good job of this, very good job. University of Iowa does a good job. Oregon. I mean, there's so many actually that do a good job that I almost don't want to start listing them because I'll be like insulting. Well, hey, what about me? But it's not what you see in the more selective private scene at all. It's a completely different vibe and zeitgeist. But it's also partly reflects the mindset of the people that are sitting there and what they want to hear too. Mm-hmm. Like those families don't want to hear that you're going to admit most people. And I'll tell you, I'll have kids that will say this to me all the time. They'll be like, you know what? I was interested in that school, but most of the kids in my high school are going to get in there. So that's like a big turn off to them. So I totally get the pressure that schools feel that if people think we're too easy to get in, they're not going to think we're any good, and they're not going to come. And for the most part, that is how I see the public thinking, unless that's how the public's thinking that is aspiring to a highly selective school. Of course, there's a whole other kind of applicant that, hey, I'm just going to stay local and stay at home, or I'm just going to go to my state school, or the state school is our family tradition. Like, it's all based on the mentality of the family.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that, I would be so many American teens' life would be easier if we just kind of started divorcing the selectivity rate, whatever that is, from the quality of the school, and just looked at a school on its merits and just didn't even think about that. I think people would be much happier.
Or certainly realize that a school is so much more than just that. Right? At the minimum, like, it's so much more than just that. Like, a lot of times schools have incredible programs that would be great. Not to mention just a culture or a setting or a location or a type of kid or philosophy or mission that is just so aligned with who that person is. So all those things. One thing I really like that Sue Corner said, and by the way, we've really gotten great feedback.
Yeah, that was a fantastic series of interviews.
I thought you would like it, and sometimes when I'm doing an interview, I can just tell our listeners are going to like this one. And that was that one. And that's why I let it go longer, because I felt I'm doing this, like, I've done over 100 interviews, and I was like, oh, our listeners are going to like it. But yeah, we've gotten a great response. But she addressed this point. Like, when I was asking her something, she said, well, I'm fortunate enough to be at a school that gets to say yes more than it says no.
Right.
And like, she wore that as a badge of honor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's like kind of, it's either, do you want to exclude people, or do you want to invite everyone to the party and give them a great education? And I guess I'm kind of more philosophically aligned with the latter. It's like I'm working with a student who's interested in aerospace engineering, and I came across the school Wichita State, which is not very well known. And it's not like super selective at all, but they have a very strong aerospace engineering program.
Sure.
And in fact, they just poached the dean of University of Arizona's engineering program to run their program. And, the student is just kind of entranced by it. And no one expected that, of would be maybe one of her top choices, because it doesn't have that, prestige factor, but it's an amazing program. Wichita has a ton of aerospace industry in it. And, that could very well be where the student ends up. So it's just.
Well, that's a good reminder of how many times schools develop really strong programs, and they're fantastic in that program. And I get this question a lot. Well, is anybody going to know my degree's any good? Well, I always tell people, I say, the people that are hiring, they have more knowledge of where the good programs are than just Joe Blow on the street.
Exactly.
And so that's what you have to keep in mind. The benchmark is not, what do my peers or friends think of the school? They don't live in this world every day. And one of the things I want to do, Lisa, either one of us could do it. I really want to interview somebody on the hiring side.
Yeah, that'd be a really good idea.
Yeah. One of former clients from Florida, that's what she does. So she could be a good one. But, because I've had conversations with her about this, but I think that could be really good, just talking about what they look for. And I did do an interview that's going to air in probably the next 60 days. Because now that we have two episodes a week, I don't have them like sitting in the kitty for like 5-6 months anymore.
Got to keep up the pace.
Yeah, because we blow through 2 a week. But I did another university president interview with the University of West Florida's president.
Oh, interesting.
And she drew on the research of, what employers are looking for and how they're constantly in conversation with them and studying those things and how they incorporate that into their offerings. And even sometimes if they have to sunset a program, they're looking at where it was interesting. But I think that would be a really great interview, because I think a lot of people, they just want the best for their kid. And if they feel like they think, they question, are some of these schools reputable, when they can have incredible programs that can be reputable. Yeah, and Wichita State's a great example of that. And the other thing is, just anytime an area is known for something, then you'll tend to find really good schools. So you kind of said the secret, like that Wichita area is known for that. So, so you get that. And that's very, very common, because it'd be crazy for you not to do that. If you're on the beach, you need to have a good marine biology program.
Right.
Right. If you're in DC, you need to have good international relations. And I could, go on and on and on with many more examples. And so, you're shooting yourself in the foot if you don't take advantage of your natural location. College of Charleston, you're going to have a good hospitality and tourism. you're right there. And of course, all of your land grant schools, I mean, they were founded with ag, and so they're going to have really strong, ag majors consistently. And I mean, we have Michigan State on right now for our interview, and a lot of their really strong majors are kind of linked to that. So it's good. Well, let's dive into the questions.
All
We got
right.
a series of questions.
We got a bunch of questions
today. Yep, and this will be a 2 or 3 parter, depending on how long it takes us to get through them.
All right. I'm sure we'll just whiz through them, right? Because that's what we do.
Right. That's what you do.
No,
but you're not flying solo.
I'm not. I don't know.
You got Gabby Mark over here.
Yeah, I can do my own gabbing. It's just that you're so superlative at it that I'll never catch up. So, okay.
Superfluous, maybe.
That's not nice. Oh, boy. I did not say that at all. Okay.
I did.
So, moving on to the question. The first question comes from Jessica in Connecticut. And she asked a really important question, I think, which is, how do I decide what my early decision school is going to be? I want to know. Plus, my parents keep asking me which school I'm going to ED to.
So I have to let our listeners in on a little secret. So
there you go again.
No, this one is I'm permitted to. Just because I'm letting you in, it doesn't mean I'm breaking rules. It's not some top Vatican thing that nobody's allowed to know.
I'm just teasing
you. So I know you are. We have to have fun. So probably 90% of our questions that we answer on this podcast, they come from listeners who send them in. There's about 10% that I get asked when I'm in a counseling session with a student or a parent. And I'm like, ooh, that was good. Our listeners would love to hear that. Because, I've just been doing this long. And I can tell a question that other people need to hear. And so this was literally a session I did today. And, of course, I always ask for permission. But, yeah, so this was not one that got sent in. This was in a student session. So this is what she said. So I think, Lisa, you probably know me well enough. I'm going to put you on the spot. How do you think I answered this question?
I think you answered it by talking to your student about the importance of researching, getting to know, getting to hopefully visit the school before you make that choice, and really looking at the finances to make sure, with net price calculators and things like that, that is something that's within your family's budget. And just, because once you sign up, then, that's where you're going. And so to really check it out, kick all the tires you can first before you sign that agreement.
So not true, but I would certainly do that for if it's a family where finances was an issue, a concern. This is a family that's got the money set aside, ready to pay, blah, blah, all that. But what I did say, so that normally your answer would be right. If you had more contextual if you had more contextual, if you had more contextual knowledge, I didn't give you enough to work with. So here's what I said. I said, let's pump the brakes right away. Before we start out as our starting point, where should my ED be? Let's start with figuring out what your top schools are. And then let's even see if they even offer ED. So the starting point is not where should my ED, and I'm having the similar conversation with somebody in Northern California right now. What's my ED going to be? I'm not sure what my ED is going to be. That is not the right mindset to have. The right mindset to have is, what are my top schools that I'm most interested in? And then let's take a look at what admission methods they even offer. This might surprise people. Less than 10% of colleges out there have ED. Mm-hmm. Less than 10%. So if you, for example, are interested in public flagship colleges, this is a student that's interested in quite a few of those, actually. Maryland being one of them. She has a lot of interest in. There's some family ties there. They go back there. Only one public flagship in the country has ED, the University of Virginia. That's it. None of the others do. So the starting point is not where's my ED. The starting point is what are my schools I'm most interested in. Okay, then, we'll put them through the financial lens if that's a factor. This case it's not, but in most cases it is, right? A lot of cases it is. And then from there, let's talk about some of the other stuff you said, like do you thoroughly know them? Have you vetted them? Are you comfortable committing? There's other factors you need to look at as well. Like one of the schools that Jessica's interested in has ED, but she's highly likely to be admitted RD
right.
there.
So then it wouldn't be a good use of your ED.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just not necessary. Like, why box yourself in, and you might say, well, I know I want to go there. Well, I'm not big on applying ED if you're highly likely to be admitted. Sometimes even people that say money's not as much of a factor, if somebody else throws a really generous offer at them, they might think twice. And then a lot of times people will learn something between November to May that could change their mind about their ED. That happens a lot.
Sure.
We see it all the time. People get deferred from their first ED school. They eventually get removed from that deferral status, but then they find another school they like more. So having that extra 6 months, if you have the luck, I'm not anti-ED. I had one kid that applied ED and one didn't. I'm certainly not anti-ED at all, but it has to be the right situation. So the point is, the starting point is not let me find my ED. Now, listen, I totally understand what that's coming from. That's coming because and this is what I said to her, because then she proceeded this. It was part 2, but my parents are asking me what's my ED. That was like part 2 of the question. I said all of the talk on whether it's the water cooler, the cocktail circuit, all of it is ED significantly increases your chances to get in. And that is true at the majority of the schools that offer it. But just keep in mind, that's only less than 1/10 of all the colleges out there that offer it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to keep that in mind. But that's the frenzy that you're going to hear. And in certain circles, 95% of people are applying to schools that have ED, depending on what circle you're in. If you're in a circle of like a very selective private school or a very high-powered suburban public, that might be the culture where 80 to 90% of people go to schools that offer ED. Because, listen, most of the schools that offer ED are the more selective ones. Mm-hmm. With the exception being your the public schools intentionally don't do it because they don't see it as being consistent with their access mission. That's why UVA took so much heat. The Washington Post did a whole story on that. It was funny because I was interviewing Greg Roberts right around that time, who's their dean of admission, and man, did he have the arrows coming for his head. But I think they've done it incredibly responsibly. He said that, and he had in my opinion, they had good reasons to do it. Personally, I'm not one of these people that believes that a public school can have ED without it being inconsistent with their mission, but they need to not take kids that are weaker just because they're locked in. And that's what he said. We're probably never going to take more than 30%. We're not going to take a different kid than we would take automatically, but it is a peace of mind for them, and it can help us with our management. This came right after the year where they over-enrolled by 4%. So being able to help them a little bit with enrollment management, I personally understood it, and I don't have any criticism of it, but most people believe that the idea of a public school offering ED is incompatible because ED favors people that have resources and don't need to compare money. So it's incompatible with an access mission.
Right.
Now, it's not only the public schools. In addition to the public schools, some of the most selective private schools like Stanford and Princeton, Notre Dame, Harvard, MIT, Caltech, Yale, that offer anything from unrestricted early action to restrictive early action to single choice early action, but they all don't offer early decision. So that's another reason why the starting point should not be, how do I decide what my early decision is going to be? It could be a public school that doesn't offer early decision, a selective private school that doesn't offer early decision, or a non-selective public or private school that doesn't offer early decision. So does that make sense that my starting point is like pump the brakes on
right? Well, no, I think
where's my ED? Let's figure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, do you need an ED? Like, is that
Correct.
the best idea? Is that the best strategy for you?
Yeah, or is it like you don't ED just to ED? Like another example, I was working with a student last year. All the schools that she was looking at were private schools that had ED, and so the whole mindset was, yeah, we're going to ED. It's going to increase our chances. We're going to do it. we've got the money set aside. We're prepared for that aspect of it. We understand that, but we're prepared. And so, and the last second, she happens to take a trip that was just an entertainment only trip and go to a football game at the University of Michigan. I hate to say this is my rival school, but it is what it is. I have to give them a little love. So she was blown away by the environment. And she's like, I think I might have changed my college list. There's something happening there. Look how those people gathering, all that energy. She went to a football game. You can't deny, this is her, you cannot deny something is happening there. Look at all that energy. I loved it. So, I'm doing consultation with her at the end. Everybody wanted her to ED. The whole culture, everybody around her, you got ED. I remember saying to her, can I ask you something? If you got in Michigan, would you go? She said, yeah, probably. And then I'm like, well, then why are you EDing other places?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the first point. Is you really need to look at that. And it might seem simple, but it's often overlooked. Any thoughts, Lisa?
No, I absolutely 100% agree with you.
Yeah. So we'll see how this one trends. Like, she received the feedback really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was just a different kind of thinking, because all the pressure around is not only where am I going to ED at, but where am I going to ED2 at if my ED1 doesn't work out. And here's the thing. This is what's tricky about doing college counseling. There's just so much nuance involved. Like that is not a bad strategy for somebody who all your top schools offer ED.
Right.
And you're able to you start early enough in this process so you can have the mindset, well, I have to decide in May anyway, so let me just do the research ahead of time so that I can know in November or December. And if you're prepared on the financial side, like that is like not wrong to think that way. But it's not wrong to think that way for a certain kind of student in a certain group of schools in a certain financial situation. Like there's just a lot of caveats in place. And I think what we have a tendency to do is to try to systematize things without customizing things. So, all right. I think we talked about Jessica's question enough. Let's move on to the next one.
Good luck, Jessica. Okay,
yeah, good luck. Did I blow the secret, by the way? Did I blow the secret? Was I allowed to share that secret?
I have no idea.
I forget what the secret was.
I forgot
you don't know what I'm talking about. The secret was that 10% of the questions are ones I just pull out of counseling and ask for permission and ask if I can share their name.
That was so disappointing as a secret. It's just they couldn't.
You thought you were going to get something juicy.
Yeah, like that. So
it wasn't worthy of the S word.
No, it wasn't worthy of even remembering, I guess.
Yeah. Friends, this completes the first half. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, last week you heard the first part of our interview. Now it's time for the second part. With the decision to go test optional, is there any other aspect of the application that you feel is getting a little bit more attention now that one piece is removed in some instances?
So we had a piece that we've had for decades. So one of the professors on campus created this formula a while ago, but it's what we call an MSU calculated GPA. And basically it takes a look at students coming from a particular high school. So you mentioned your wife being at Murray Wright years ago. And so we would look at all of the students who come from Murray Wright over a particular time and what was their academic GPA at Michigan State after their first semester.
That is great. Georgia Tech does that. I have not known of anybody else to do that. So you guys are building models so you can sort of see.
So we've had
how
that
schools,
information.
Yeah, how certain schools, how much grade inflation or how grades translate from one school to another.
And that's the big thing. So I wouldn't call it grade inflation, but there's a definite difference. And so if you and I both had a 3.5 and we attended different high schools, your academic experience would obviously be different than mine. But students coming from your high school with a 3.5 at Michigan State the first semester, they might end up with a 3.3, which is common, that there would be some decrease because the transition, A, and B, because the rigor and the learning is at a different level, coming from high school going into college. Mine might be the 3.5, but mine might be a 3.1
Mm-hmm.
just because of the difference, again, in the academic experiences. Still both great students after the first semester, 3.1 and 3.3, but we have that information because we found that we tend to get applications from students from the same high schools. And on occasion, obviously, every year we get some that are from different schools we've never seen before, but typically we have a high repeat ratio of applications from the schools that we receive.
With Castech being one of them, I know that.
So,
So I get excited about this because I when I did admissions, I actually built a model like this myself for
okay.
admission office, and it was incredibly helpful. And I'm surprised I don't see more schools doing it. And I'm sure there's more that do it that I don't know. Do you also do this for out-of-state applicants, where you have sizable numbers, or is it only an
Yeah.
in-state thing? Mm-hmm.
No, it's out of state and international.
Oh wow.
And
Mm-hmm.
so in a place where maybe we have a student from a new school or we've never gotten an application from, then we would just use our use a cumulative average based on the geography of where they come from. So we break ours up into Michigan resident, rest of the country, and then all international.
And is this something that every admissions reader sort of has access to when they're reading a file? They can sort of see the data and say, grades from this school. Hey, this school, a kid with a 3.5 ends up with a 3.5, but at this school, a 3.5 goes down to a 2.9. Like, is
Yeah,
that something that readers have access to? And
readers have access to see that. Yeah, but so that's why we didn't have to ask for any additional information beyond the test score. And
sure,
when you think about what the test score was really supposed to be telling us, it really is the same thing.
sure.
So we felt highly confident that the information we were getting from the calculated GPA would be accurate. And then sometimes we get the question, what happens if the curriculum at a school changes? Do you guys automatically change it? No. We look to see what the experiences are from those students. So if a school didn't offer IB before and they began offering IB and you saw an increase in the rigor at that particular school, it might take 1 or 2 years, but you might expect to see an increase in the MSU calculated GPA. So that same student with a 3.5 who may have had a 3.1 before now has a 3.2 or a 3.25 at MSU because of that change in the curriculum at the school. And consequently, it could also go the same way.
And are you recalculating GPAs because there's so many scales out there? And are you just going with what's on the transcript? I mean, some people
We
just
go
go with
with
on the
what's on the
transcript.
transcript. Yeah, we go with what's on the transcript for the most part. We do recalculate for those that are not on a 4-point scale.
Okay. And are you using weighted or unweighted for your, when you're if they provide both on a transcript?
Most of the time, we're using the weighted.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. Talk to me a little bit about the role an individual school plays in the decision. So, School of Engineering is a different school than School of Agriculture, right? And so, what role does the individual school that the student is interested in play? And are there times that the actual major within the school plays a role as well, in the assessment? Like, oh, this student wants to do mechanical engineering. We know that's one of our harder programs. Like, tell me a little bit about that. That's always something people are interested in.
So at Michigan State, we don't have that as a part of our admissions criteria. So we do admissions to the university. So those other programs that you're talking about that have or require a higher level of rigor, those students will have to apply secondary. So we have a secondary process. So the College of Business has one, the College of Engineering has one. So typically when students are admitted, they're not necessarily admitted directly to the college or major. So we're admitting to the university. You have declared that this is the college or major that you would like to, have as your major or to serve as your major. And in those cases, some students will have to apply to a secondary application process after they complete a certain number of prerequisites. But there are other colleges like the College of Education and College of Communication Arts. The secondary application process is not required. So once you kind of declare you come in, you have to declare a major by your junior year, but technically you're in the college. when you come into the university. So you're taking the courses that are required for you to declare your major by your junior year.
So business and engineering are ones where you apply, separately in. Any other schools besides those that, once you're a current student, you need to sort of prove yourself with your MSU GPA and then apply besides business and engineering?
Nursing.
Hmm. And what kind of grade point average are those schools looking for at MSU to be competitive? I'm assuming that happens, at end of the sophomore year or some point in the middle of sophomore year, when.
So our College of Engineering is admit when ready. Our College of Business is moving into that space as well. So if a student's, got AP classes and some of those translate to course credit, then they might be able to move into the situation a little faster in terms of applying. But typically, students, I'm going to say somewhere between a 3.3 and higher, just depending on the
Hmm.
college and or the
Hmm.
major or program. But they are competitive, and some of them have space capacities where we've got to worry about that. So, but we get a lot of students who apply. So College of Business is actually our number one college in terms of applications. So we got over 10,000 applications this year for our College of Business.
Hmm. Hmm. You mentioned merit scholarships before, and you mentioned that even without testing, now students are still eligible. Can you talk about a few of the merit scholarships and sort of give a sense of sort of what kind of profile a student would need to have to sort of be competitive?
So we have a variety of scholarships, and it really depends on where you're coming from. So if you're coming from Michigan, those start at a 3.3. If you're coming from outside the state of Michigan, those start at about a 3.0. Our international students, depending on the type or kind and where in the world they're coming from, those will typically also start at about a 3.0 GPA, but most of them are a little bit higher. Those are the ones that we offer out of the Office of Admissions. There are other scholarships that students are eligible for, especially for our honors college. So we actually have a competition, which we call our Alumni Distinguished Scholarship competition. And those students' GPA start at a 3.8 and go up. Got to be in the top 5% of their class and taking a reasonable number of the rigorous courses that are available. So AP, IB, honors colleges, or honors classes. Just depends on what they've got available to them. So if you're at a school that doesn't offer honors or AP or IB, you wouldn't be excluded from consideration for the honors college.
Thank you. That's awesome, John. Um, we had a question also that came in from Vince, who is one of our co-hosts. He's also a college counselor from Los Angeles, and he wants to know what's on Michigan State's bucket list in terms of like strategic priorities, big initiatives, that the school is looking to implement in the next, 5 or 10 years or so.
So when President Stanley came in, our new president, he immediately put together a new strategic plan and a new DEI strategic plan. So we are off to the races on that. As I mentioned before, closing the graduation gap, and so we've had two major initiatives that we've done in the last 5 years. So we're continuing to see the benefits of those. But one of those was a 15 block grant, tuition grant. I'm not a grant, a block tuition model. And so, in that block tuition model, we highly recommended that students take at least 15 credit hours per semester so that they would be on track to graduate in 4 years. So, that would improve our 6 year graduation rate. It would also begin to help students cut down on the amount of debt that they were carrying because they'd be graduating sooner. The second one was a 2 year live on requirement for first year students, requiring them to live on campus. So our research showed that those students tended to have higher grades and two tended to graduate faster than those students who moved off campus after their first year. So we went back to upholding that ruling for a 2 year live on requirement. In terms of other things that are on the bucket list, we have recently announced that we're going to be building a multicultural center. After the president came in, he had conversations with our student of color groups on campus, the affinity groups, and many of them were lobbying and have been lobbying for quite a few years about having a standalone physical building. They've got space currently in our student union on campus, but we are going to be engaging in building a new building for our multicultural center. Um, Other things that we're going to be working on pretty diligently are improving access and being very deliberate about it. Similarly for faculty and staff as well. So the president and the provost have been working really hard to um, make a lot of those things happen, and so we are starting to see the fruits of some of their labor and effort. But they are definitely living up to the pieces that they've put out there. Other things that you're likely to see are upgrades to our physical facilities for our intramural buildings. So they are in need of some updates and upgrades. We started when Vice President Gore came in. Um, well, he came in almost the same time I did, about 14 years ago. And so when he came on board, he immediately started working to upgrade our dining facilities. So if you've been back to campus and had an opportunity to go over to Brody, you know what I mean. But the dining facilities now are part of the shining stars on campus. And so just a phenomenal operation of what we do. So if you think about the dining facilities of old, there was this one big kitchen, kind of a cafeteria, and people would push out food on these big rolling carts and drop them off on the steaming stations. That's not the case anymore. There are private kitchens now for each of the different types of food, and everything is made fresh daily. So it is a really nice thing. They've even found a way to recycle the leftover food or the old food or the uneaten food that traditionally would have gone to the landfill. So we recycle that food now and turn it into compost, and are now found enough farmers and others who are purchasing that compost to use as fertilizer. So Michigan State has done a great job in terms of just continuing to be one of the leaders in sustainability on the campus.
Wow, that's exciting. It's a great answer to that question, and I'm kind of excited about a lot of things you said. I'm certainly excited to see for students of color, we'll have housing for affinity groups. I know that can be extremely important to help people in their transition. And Holden Hall used to have a whole giant room for the Black Caucus there that I found it to be extremely helpful when I was a student.
So it won't have any housing, but it is going to have spaces where those groups can meet.
Okay.
And host programs and do different kinds of events and things of
Yep.
that nature. So it'll have event space for them as well. So I think they just identified the architect that's going to lead the effort for the design of the facility.
Nice.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 245, it is an important one. It is the application guide for first-year students for completing the Common Application, better known as the Common App. Now is the time. Rising seniors are all in doing this. And for juniors, you should be fooling around and exploring, experimenting, and getting to know the schools on your radar. So basically, it's tips and best practices to give yourself the best chance of completing the Common App the correct way. So there are short videos in here and paragraphs explaining things. So there's basic things like gathering your materials, how to create your account, how to add colleges, and then it gets into more sophisticated things like how the account rollover works, how you add an advisor with the enable preview to it, how the Common App recommendations are done through Naviance and other partner software. So things like that are in there. But everything from other recommenders to transcripts when you have to upload your transcript, and the courses and grade section, and then the requirements like testing policies, portfolios, certainly all your writing supplements, all of that is all in this PDF, which I'm going to attach and put it in the show notes. But for anybody doing the Common Application, I strongly encourage you to look at this first year guide for the Common App. Now return to my interview with John Ambrose of Michigan State University. And our last question from a listener comes from Jeff from Illinois. And he says, MSU is extremely large. How does the university help to support students, especially freshmen, so they don't get lost in the masses?
Oh man, one of the things that we did, I want to say almost 10 years ago, we broke the campus up into 5 distinct neighborhoods. And by doing that, it allowed us to decentralize major services that the students would often use, but it would make it easier for them to engage. So, as an example, typically when you were there, you weren't far from the clinic, the health clinic, from where you were, but it was still it would have been a decent 10 to 15 minute walk. Um, so it's not like you needed to drive or catch the bus to get there. But there are other places on campus where during the wintertime, if you're not feeling well and you got a cold and the only place you can get to is the clinic, you got to make that hoof. So what they did was they put nurse practitioners in each of the neighborhoods. And so those nurse practitioners are there now to really do more of um, some preemptive work. So now, if instead of waiting until you got a full blown cold and are sick to go to the clinic, you might stop in and see the nurse practitioner because you've got a relationship with him or her that allows you to say, hey, you know what, I'm not feeling real good right now. I got a little bit of a sniffle or something. Could you take a look or prescribe something for me? And we found that that has been a real big plus in terms of being able to make MSU feel smaller than it actually is for students in terms of dealing with that. And so that's just one of the things that we've done. We are currently working right now to do an assessment on all of our classes to really figure out how we can continue to close this graduation gap. So as we continue to work on that research and look at that analysis of how do we do that, we're looking at the actual classes. We're looking at and trying to figure out how do we help students who are not doing well in a particular course. And we're trying to find ways to help improve the services offered to those students so that we want to see them graduate. We know that if we admitted you, you're qualified to be a Spartan. You're qualified to be a Spartan alum. The question becomes, what are we willing to do in order to help them get through it? And that becomes the big piece for us. So.
That's great. And my biggest complaint at Michigan State were large classes. I've been reading about learning living communities that Michigan State has now that I don't remember. Of course, I was there in the 80s. Has Michigan State done anything to address class size?
That's part of what we're working on. So we're looking at those things in terms of what is the optimal class size for particular students. But one of the benefits that's come out of the pandemic is we had to take every class we have up online, and so that's allowing now for a different kind of a feel. But students and instructors are now beginning to adapt K through 16. So all of us are having to learn online. We're having to also teach ourselves a little bit in terms of what is your learning style. How do you learn? How do you help yourself? Can you teach yourself some things? And the answer to both of those are yes. You can definitely teach yourself some things. But if you don't know what your learning style is, you may not understand the best way for you to grasp the content or to really consume it. So I think that's going to be the big piece to move things forward. But those kinds of things and that as we adapt to them are going to provide a greater experience for students who might suffer from being in a big classroom setting. So as you know, with everybody being on Zoom, you don't quite get the same energy that you would being in a large room, but you do very much get a different experience that can be a little bit more that feels one-on-one, if you will, or more kind of like a round robin discussion with just a few people.
So are the online classes going to continue post-pandemic as an option for students? It sounds like that's what I'm hearing.
I would say yes. We have not made any final decisions, but we are looking at this has now given us the ability to offer possibly degrees online.
Sure.
Where undergraduate degrees. So we didn't have that option before. It was available for some graduate degree programs, but not really at the undergraduate level. So if we're able to offer these some degree programs online, I think it would be a great thing for the university to do moving forward. So at this point, a lot of things are explorative, and we're taking a look at, how can we make it work, because online education is not new.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of people who start college who don't finish and are not really pushing into the returning adult marketplace. But that market itself is huge. And so I think a number of institutions are asking themselves, how can we tap into it now that we've got this resource? Because having all of your classes up online is a resource. Now the question is, how can we use that to improve access to the Spartan experience for more people?
No, I think it's great. And I think this is what schools need to do, not just think about the 18-year-old and think about that non-traditional student, the student that can't come to your campus. I know Morehouse in Atlanta has recently launched a whole online degree, and it's tapping into a whole different group of students that, couldn't come to Atlanta and go to school, but can still have some aspect of the Morehouse experience. And so, obviously, it could be a good revenue generator for schools, but it's also a great way to reach more international students. And I think this is the wave of the future. So it's nice to see MSU being cutting edge on that. John, I misspoke. I almost forgot Lorraine. How could I forget Lorraine? Lorraine's from Michigan, and she's actually a Michigan State grad herself. And her son, she says, I'm a Michigan State grad myself, and my son visited and chose MSU because of the RISE LLC for environmental study type majors at Bailey Brody. He liked the small greenhouse, mushroom room, beehives connected to the dorm. Then she says, I found the communication process to be complicated, though. I wanted a simple automated email bot to update progress before deadlines to avoid extra fees and penalties, not an invasion of privacy between student and university. This would be good for my financial help and my balance. Is Michigan State working on improving anything along those lines?
Yes, we are. So I'm glad Lorraine asked this question. A lot of people don't know, but MSU developed its own student information system, and then basically we operated it for decades until we could no longer get service on our equipment. And so over the last 3 years, we've implemented a new system for the entire university. And as you can imagine, with an organization as large as ours, that was no easy feat to do and required a lot of meetings and even the implementation process. We brought in some experts from the outside to help us with that. Additionally, the Office of Admissions started implementing a new business application called Slate so that we could communicate with families a little better than we were able to do before and create some of that automation. And so we just completed our first year up, but we built it the entire way. So we were, get one piece built, use it, and they're building the next piece before waiting for us to get there. So it was quite an arduous process, but I'm glad to say that we've completed it. We've still got a lot of work to do within it, but she should and others will see an increase in the communication coming from the university. It's one of the big things that we're talking about. But if you imagine having knee surgery and having to learn to walk all over again, that's what's happening with us with our new student information system. So we know what to do, but with this new knee or new hip, you may not understand the full range of what's possible yet until you get some miles on it. So that's what we're trying to do now is get some miles on this new system and figure out what it can and can't do, and what other kinds of changes we need to do in order to elevate and get our service model back up to snuff so that we're providing students and families with the most up-to-date information and reminders so that they don't miss deadline dates and that kind of stuff.
You're going to love Slate. I mean, they literally have pretty much a 100% retention rate, and
We do
1,400.
already.
Yeah.
We do
1,400
already.
colleges using it. I mean, I've yet to, they got to have that one of the highest net promoter scores out there. So it's just been, I'm really happy to hear that. It's been a real asset to schools. Alexander Clark, a brilliant guy who's founded Technolutions, the parent company, is doing good stuff. So good stuff there.
Yeah.
So Lorraine mentioned the RISE LLC program for environmental studies majors. I'm just going to ask you about some of, really extremely strong programs that Michigan State has, and just have you make a comment on or two, whatever pops in your head on them. And that's one of them. Anything you want to say at all, John, on the environmental studies majors?
Sure. So the RISE program stands for Residential Initiative on the Study of the Environment. And so the program is interdisciplinary among 7 colleges on the campus. It's a residential program. It's competitive. Students have to apply, but it offers them hands-on experience through projects and co-curricular opportunities to really help them explore the world of sustainability and to help them develop their career interests so that they can figure out how they want to engage the world from the lens of being environmentally sustainable.
That's great. And once again, Michigan State just has these amazing programs that, a lot of the different rankings out there have Michigan State anywhere from number 1 to top 5 in the country on a number of them. One that was strong even when I was there was hospitality. I know the hotel was on campus and students get an opportunity to do internships at the hotel. Talk to us a little bit about hospitality majors at Michigan State.
Now, Mark, you started this, so I already told you, we don't brag, right? So we
But
start
I
talking
gave you a
about
softball. I gave you a
I
layup.
know, but I'm just saying we start talking about number 1, number 2 at this. I don't want to seem like I'm going back on it, but these are things we are definitely proud of. But more than that, these are the kinds of programs that are making a difference. It's not always what it sounds, and hospitality is one of them. So despite the fact that it's the second oldest in the nation, it's number 1 among public universities, but there's a minor in real estate that a lot of people don't know that students can get. They have a 98% placement rate following graduation.
Wow.
The faculty are among the best in the industry in research and expertise, but these students will not just run restaurants, they will run the chain or parent organization that runs these restaurants. They lead and manage some of the leading hotel chains in the country. They will teach you, and students will get experience in everything from casinos to resorts, um, and just learning how to even purchase those kinds of properties, much less run and operate them. So the exposure that the students in hospitality get is bar none. It is one of, I think, our best programs on campus that gives students access to global experience, access to research, but access again to some of the greatest minds in the world of hospitality, but not to mention the alumni base. They are fanatical about coming back and bringing Spartans along. And I challenge anybody, the next time you check into a hotel, you ask to see if one of the managers or area managers and ask them where they got the degree from. 1 out of 3 are probably going to be a Michigan State alum.
Wow, that's powerful. Talk to me about pre-vet, which I know is another very strong program.
So pre-vet's not really a degree program, but it is for freshmen and sophomores who want to become vets. So this program allows a student to apply for the VetMed program of their choosing. So not just at Michigan State, but they could select, when they're ready for their doctorate of VetMed program. So the unique thing about this one is they take one course for a few weeks with intense focus on a particular organ system. In an animal, and that's what they do to help them get focused on it. But it's a real hands-on experience for the students. They also get access to all 7 of our farms um, and uh, and also some study abroad programs to help them enrich their experience and exposure. So it's a full complement to really prepare them to be the best vet that they can.
Awesome. Friends, on Monday's episode, I will introduce you to the newest member of the Your College Bound Kid team, Linda Depker. And if that name sounds familiar, I've interviewed Linda about how she has used Facebook parent groups to learn more about the schools her child is considering. And we're extremely excited about how she's going to help Your College Bound Kid podcast in a number of different ways. And I'll be chatting with her so you can see the new role she'll play to help us out. And part of which will be the restructuring of YCBK Plus. So you'll want to hear that. Now, that's not our main interview. If you didn't hear Lisa's interview with Dr. Christina Boyd-Smith on episode 244, please trust me, you need to listen to this interview. Now, one of the reasons I'm so excited about this interview is I now have a great resource that I can give to every parent whose kid is telling them you're talking about college too much. I have a great resource to give to every parent who has a B or a BC student. And the content would equally apply to a C student. I have a great resource to give to any parent who has a learning difference, like ADD, whose child has a learning difference. So that's a fantastic interview. Well, guess what? Lisa struck gold twice in a row, and she has another great interview for us. I want to give you a little bit of background about this interview because it's really important. So I was gobsmacked when I looked at our questionnaire and I learned that 31% of you, so basically 1 in 3, have a kid in college. I thought to myself, wow, we should probably focus a little less on college admissions and a little more on doing college successfully. It shouldn't be surprising because just because you're listening now for your high school student shouldn't presuppose that that's your oldest kid. I mean, Lisa's a great example. She listens, with her middle school and high school kid in mind, but she also has a college kid. So the next thing that really happened was Diana from Wisconsin, who's a member of what I call our listening family. That's somebody who never misses an episode. It's like a community of us. And she communicated with me quite a bit over the last 3 years about what she likes about our podcasts and if she thinks something could improve. And so I know that she has her best interest at heart. Well, she challenged us about 6 months ago. And she wrote in and she said, I love the podcast, but I'm searching all of your content and I've heard every episode and I'm not finding that much information to help my kid now that she's in college. And so we had to acknowledge that Diana was right. So I said, Diana, send us any questions you think we should be answering. So our regular listeners know that became a 3-part question segment on this. Lisa and I said to ourselves, I think we need to do more than just have a 3-part question segment on success in college. So I said, Lisa, I'd love for you to take the lead on interviewing more people who work or have worked at colleges so we can help our listeners successfully transition to college. So I hope I don't give anybody a heart attack here, but I'm going to shock you. I'm going to actually give you a famous quote from a movie. Yes, right. That's me, movie in the same word. Wall Street is the name of the movie by Michael Douglas. Here's the quote. Lisa bagged the elephant. In other words, she secured a sensational guest to give advice for her parents on helping their kids transition to college. And that guest is Marshall Gentry. Now, he's currently the enrollment outreach coordinator at Durham Academy, and he's going to be Lisa's interview for the next 2 Monday episodes. So Marshall earned a BA in political science and French from the University of the South, Sewanee. We've done a spotlight on that great school. He earned a master's degree in social work with a concentration in families, adolescents, and children from UNC Chapel Hill, and 2 certificates from the Harvard Institute for Higher Ed, the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He was also most recently the vice president for student life and the dean of students at the University of the South. Previously, Marshall was the associate vice president for student life and the dean of student affairs at Yale University in New Haven. And Marshall has also served as the associate dean of student affairs at Middlebury College, where he went on to become the associate dean of Middlebury College, where he served for 8 years. So in other words, he has significant dean and student life experience at 3 schools, University of the South, Sewanee, Middlebury, and Yale. So what Lisa does in this interview, she interviews Marshall on the topic of how to prepare for college, 10 things parents and students should know. And the first 3 are on this part 1, and then the last 7 are on part 2. It's a fantastic interviewer. It's a 2-parter. And I really hope you'll tune in and listen to it. But before I leave you, I can't leave without saying, remember, it's not where you go to college, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine not only your career success, but quite honestly, your life success. See you on Monday, everybody. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.